Hello and welcome to How to Fix It. Back to the grind and back for one last Patreon-sponsored review. For right now, the slots are still open, so they'll be back once we get more requests. The last three brought us a fairly decent Disney comedy, a book detailing a fictionalized version of Fall Out Boy's bassist, both of which were slightly outside of my comfort zone, and the second season of the CW Flash series. This last one continues its predecessor's tradition of being right inside of my wheelhouse with Threshold, aka the worst Star Trek Voyager episode to ever exist. We've already talked about Voyager, although I really should go back and revise some of my earlier videos at some point, but for right now we'll be focusing on one episode from the second season. So no 7 of 9 and no Mobile Emitter, in case you only know Voyager from the Star Trek Online missions. Threshold, well, it has a reputation. Not only has SF Debris given it a 0, but it's been accepted by all Star Trek fans, perhaps through a misguided interpretation of something that Brown and Braga said, that it's non-canonical. Though it is canonical according to the official canon. The one in my head, however, writes this one out like it writes out A Night in Sickbay and Prophet and Lace. Anyway, there's really no reason to do all this prefacing. You know what's coming, I know what's coming, so let's just get straight into Threshold. The episode revolves around Voyager, or more accurately, Tom Paris, B'Elanna Torres, and Harry Kim, attempting to break the Warp-10 barrier, which in the Next Generation era is infinite speed, so fast that they would be everywhere in the known universe at once. Figuring that out would, in theory, allow them to get home faster, which is a staple early Voyager plot. Something to get them home faster that either doesn't work, or the reset button is bashed so hard they forget it existed. Their simulations in the holodeck continually fail, and the shuttle is destroyed, getting its nacelles ripped off during flight, leaving them discouraged. While sitting in the mess hall, Neelix walks over and intrudes on their conversation about warp theories, and through an anecdote he relates about working on a freighter, they realize the flaw in their design, that the shuttle's nacelles aren't being ripped off. Instead, the shuttle is ripping itself from the nacelle, so through some tech-teching, they manage to resolve the problem and the simulation works. They propose their plan to Janeway and the rest of the senior staff, and everyone is game, except the Doctor, who realizes that Tom has some sort of defect that makes it risky for him to undergo the stresses involved with going to Warp-10 and wants Harry to pilot the shuttle instead. In response to that, Tom acts like a petulant child and demands that he be able to do it because he's the pilot and it's his record to break. Janeway, in an uncharacteristic display of not being a stone-cold commander, lets him act that way and lets him pilot the shuttle. Meanwhile, if Wesley acted that way on the Enterprise, Picard would have kicked him off the bridge so fast his dad would have felt it. And Picard is one of the most lax of the captains in Star Trek. They go through with it, and the test goes off without a hitch, save for Tom vanishing for a while and reappearing, with him revealing that he was everywhere at once, and Janeway wanting them to run tests on the shuttle to create a map based on that information. While celebrating with a cup of Neelix's coffee, Tom collapses, and the Doctor discovers that it's not Neelix's coffee that hurt him, but he's allergic to the oxygen in the water in the coffee, realigning the atmosphere in sickbay to accommodate Tom's new needs. Tom's body starts degenerating, though it's unrelated to that defect that Janeway mentioned earlier, and he starts dying, becoming more and more delirious with each treatment, and we learn a lot about his character background. But it doesn't work, and after asking for them to tell his father that he did it, Tom dies. During the night, as the Doctor sits in his office, he hears a strange noise coming from one of the bio beds. He goes to investigate, finding that Tom is not only alive, but he has 2 hearts. So I guess that theory was proven to be true. Time Lords do get their second heart upon their first regeneration after all. You know, personally, I really like the 4th Tom Paris, and I think he was definitive. But I also think that people are still way too attached to the 10th one. Though it is about time that Tom Paris is a woman. There's a bit where Michael Jonas sends info to the Kazon, but that's a running plot thread that isn't relevant to this episode itself, and Janeway speaks with Tom, with him being even more delusional than he already was, and even more mutated, his tongue falling out while he rants at Janeway about how she's jealous of him breaking the threshold. The Doctor discovers that Tom isn't mutating so much as he's evolving at a highly advanced rate. Ignoring the fact that evolution, and really science, doesn't work that way, the Dr. techs up a solution using the warp core, and when they go to implement it, Tom goes rogue and steals a shuttlecraft and Janeway, taking her through the threshold as well. After searching for a few days, Voyager locates the shuttlecraft and heads down to the planet that it landed on, finding that Tom and Janeway have mutated into lizards because reasons I'll touch on later, and have mated and created offspring in those few days. The crew returns them to the ship, reverses the process, and Tom and Janeway are saved. And the episode ends on a really damn uncomfortable scene, where Tom apologizes to Janeway about the whole mating thing, and Janeway questions whether it could have possibly been her who wanted to mate, since females of the species tend to do that. Oh, and Janeway puts Tom in for a commendation, but really, after all that, do you really still care? Just go to the next one. Just kidding. I wouldn't be doing my due diligence if I just said that there was nothing good about the episode. First things first, the premise is actually really interesting. The idea of the warp barrier is cool, and the idea of breaking it is even cooler. It was even mentioned by science consultant Andre Bormanis that the premise reminded him of Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier, which on the surface is pretty cool. Voyager performing an impossible feat, and being so far away from Starfleet that they don't even have any support for if something goes horribly wrong. In the right hands, it could have been amazing. Unfortunately, it was in Brannon Braga's hands. And that's not to say that Braga is a horrible writer. He wrote many of my favorites of Next Generation and Voyager. But it seems that he has also written innumerable bad Star Trek episodes between the three shows that he regularly wrote for. And as a screenwriter, I can sympathize, but as a viewer and a reviewer, I have to hold it against him. Apart from that, the reason for the weird, stupid evolution stuff is because the writing staff thought it would be more interesting and more unexpected than doing the normal glowing human evolved beyond your petty squabbles thing that Star Trek usually does when they touch on evolution. And they get points for creativity on that. They were right, it was more unexpected. But again, bringing up the fact that I'm a screenwriter, I understand all too well that even the most well-intentioned ideas in the outline phase can turn out disastrous when it comes to the actual script. The idea having been that instead of glowing humans, we dial back to humanity's evolutionary origins in the water. Braga has also stated that it was an attempt to homage David Cronenberg's The Fly, evident with the gross mutations that Tom underwent during the episode, and on that front, I can definitely see the homage, but I think it was ultimately done way better in the Next Generation episode Genesis 2 years earlier, which was also written by Braga, and is a really good example of the de-evolution premise. So there is a lot of good in the episode. It's just outweighed by a lot of bad. Starting off from a character standpoint, Tom Paris is an impudent, whiny baby. This is my thing, Harry can't have it. You're a Starfleet officer, man. For all his rebelliousness and bucking authority because he was an ex-con and a former Maquis, this was a step too far into petulant child territory. And Janeway lets him do the flight anyway. She rewards him for that behavior. I have given Janeway crap for all the stuff over the years with the Caretaker and the Borg and ultimately causing Data's death by sending the Enterprise E to investigate Shinzon and the Romulus in Nemesis, but the fact that she rewards Tom's whining makes her unfit to command a desk, let alone a Starfleet vessel. Right there. If any other pilot in any other show tried to pull that shit, they'd be remanded to quarters and possibly the brig. Or in Sisko's and Lorca's case, an airlock. But that pilot would never be allowed to fly that mission. I don't give a damn how important it is to you, because by whining like that, you've proven to me that you're not mature enough to handle that responsibility. Right there, that is the bottom line of why this episode is bad. Ignoring all the evolution stuff and the bad science and crappy payoffs, that is what boils my blood. When I do How to Fix It, I usually have two methods of script writing. I either watch the movie or show and sit and take notes during it, or I watch it all the way through and start the script when I'm done. For this, I was doing the latter, but during that scene, I opened up my script document and wrote in about Tom being a whiny baby. That was the first thing I wrote down about this episode apart from the title and the categories. Well, it's nice to get that out of the way first. Obviously, the evolution stuff is stupid. The science makes little sense, though it actually did manage to be published by an actual scientific journal. And I'm not even kidding, although I really wish I was. There's also some issues in the method of the reversal, mainly because of how rushed it feels that the Doctor figures it out. Brannon Braga stated in an interview that there was more explanation into everything that happened in regards to the evolution stuff, but during the editing process it was removed. So basically nothing makes sense by design. Additionally, and this is a minor point, but the fact that Tom and Janeway mated, and the fact that they discuss whether or not Janeway initiated it, is just squicky. The effects aren't bad, but knowing that they were meant to invoke Cronenberg, yeah, no. Genesis did that. This evokes classic Doctor Who, from a decade earlier and on a shoestring budget. And that episode had H.G. Wells in it, so it had an interesting guest companion to justify it. And the final evolution, the next stage of humanity, looks like doofy lizards. Listen, if they had looked like the Gorn, I could understand it, but I refuse to believe that evolution will bring us back to those things. Even Tom's second to final form, the giant walking lizard guy, looked better than those. Have giant humanoid lizards crawling around on all fours like the Lizalfos from Breath of the Wild, and maybe I'd buy it, not goofy alligator things. And the most obvious issue is that obviously Warp 10 wasn't going to pan out because this is Season 2. A plot device I hated for early Voyager was method to finally get home that gets broken at the end of the episode because the show has to continue. Finally, a writing issue I found is that the episode just feels wrong. Maybe it's because it's a Season 2 episode and I'm more used to the later seasons at this point. And maybe it was because of the heavy editing, but it doesn't feel like a normal Voyager episode. I can't put my finger on it, so I can't explain it, but something feels off. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. First things first, fix Tom Paris's character. Have him act like an officer befitting his rank. Because I could forgive everything else and write it off as a crappy Voyager episode if he didn't have that petulant whining. They made Tom the central character because they felt he had been underused in Season 1. And this is what they did with him? No, take his past, the fact that his dad was an admiral, and play with him trying to really become the man his father wanted, or in an inverse, strike out on his own, refuse to bend to his father's will. Not this whiny bullshit where he yells at the captain and wants to fly this mission regardless of the risks. Especially not when their alternate choice is his best friend. Like, I could understand if they wanted to put Neelix in the cockpit, but Harry is his friend. He should be happy to have a part in it, considering the risk. Though I'd probably remove that bit because all that risk amounts to is the whiny petulant child stuff and nothing more. The Doctor explicitly states that the mutation and devolution have nothing to do with that defect. That one scene and Tom's entire personality is really my main issue with the episode, and if you fix that, you've got something crappy but decent enough as a bad Trek episode. Building onto that, once Tom is fixed, put the explanations back into the episode that the science, however misguided and not accurate, at least makes sense within the Star Trek universe. And I get it, you want to be different, not do the glowing humans thing, but maybe not have them evolve back into aquatic life, especially aquatic life that looks so goofy. Like I said before, Lizalfos? Maybe. Definitely not what we got. Fix the rest of the effects, get whoever worked on Genesis, and get some of that stuff into this episode, and I think that would instantly elevate the episode. Oh, and because it never comes up again and thus is pointless, cut out that bit about them mating. Yuck. But other than that, it's not that bad of an idea. It's just that, well, everything they did with it that made it a bad episode. Fix Tom's character, throw an explanation, and make the effects as good as they were in Braga's other mutation devolution episode, and you don't have a perfect episode, which Threshold could never be. It will never be perfect. But it could be a decent, if sort of crappy episode. But it would be a hell of a lot better than what we got. And that was Threshold, an overall horrible Voyager episode that, despite having an interesting premise, was boxed to hell by the creative team and had delusions of grandeur that made it fall flat on its ass. Could it have been good? Oh, hell no, but it could have been decent or bland or boring, but instead it decided to go for completely reprehensible in every way. Never has there been an episode more deserving of being fixed than Threshold. At least for Voyager. The worst episodes from the other Trek series, apart from Discovery, will get their day in the sun here one day too. In the meantime, if you'd like to see more of how to fix it, you can hit that subscribe button, and if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. Oh, and if you want to be notified of new uploads, you can hit that bell icon. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon to subject me to even more terrible stuff than Threshold. And come back next week for a look at one of the most bizarre spin-offs of the 70s. The Brady Brides. See you next time.